At 2:43 a.m. Eastern Time on January 17, 2025, the White House Situation Room received an urgent briefing request from NASA's Planetary Defense Coordination Office. That alone is unusual, but what made it extraordinary was the subject. Comet C 2019 Y4 Atlas, an object most people hadn't thought about since it shattered apart in 2020 and quietly disappeared. Within hours, senior officials from the National Security Council, the Department of Defense, and the intelligence community were assembled for a classified emergency session. By noon, congressional leaders were pulled into closed-door briefings, and by the following evening, a carefully crafted public statement acknowledged renewed analysis of historical cometary data. It sounded harmless. It wasn't. Behind the scenes, Washington was deeply unsettled. What changed? Why would a comet that no longer exists suddenly become a national security issue 5 years later? For the past 2 weeks, I've spoken with officials, reviewed leaked summaries, and reconstructed what happened inside those classified briefings. What I've uncovered points to something uncomfortable. In 2020, during the chaos of the pandemic, we may have overlooked a critical anomaly. And now, as archive data is being re-examined, officials believe Atlas may not have been a routine comet at all. Before we go further, consider this. If you believe the public deserves transparency about potential threats from space, if you remember how distracted and overwhelmed the world was in early 2020 and wonder what else slipped by unnoticed, then stay with me, because what I'm about to walk you through suggests preparedness may have been an illusion. Let's rewind to March 2020. The world was locking down. COVID-19 was spreading rapidly. Governments were in crisis mode. Hospitals were overwhelmed. Amid that global emergency, astronomers were tracking Atlas as it brightened unexpectedly while approaching the inner solar system. Then it began to fragment, breaking apart into dozens of pieces. Under normal conditions, a comet fragmenting this dramatically would have drawn intense scientific coordination. Observatories would synchronize, data would be analyzed in real time, international teams would collaborate, papers would move quickly to publication. But these were not normal conditions. Conferences were canceled. Research facilities operated with minimal staff. NASA, like every agency, shifted to remote operations almost overnight. So, when Atlas broke apart in ways some astronomers privately described as unusual, the response was limited. Yes, Hubble captured images of the nucleus before fragmentation. Ground-based telescopes followed the debris. Data was archived. But the deep collaborative investigation that should have followed never fully materialized. The world's attention was elsewhere. Then Atlas faded. The fragments moved toward the sun and disintegrated. By summer 2020, the story was over, or so it seemed. The images were archived, the trajectory data stored, pending analyses delayed. And for nearly 5 years, the event remained a footnote. Until January 2025, Dr. Patricia Hammond, an orbital mechanics specialist at Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory, was assigned in December 2024 to update risk models for interstellar object encounters. As part of her review, she chose Atlas as a case study, a well-documented cometary approach and breakup. On January 9th, while reanalyzing its orbital data, she found something that immediately concerned her. Atlas's trajectory, shifts, subtle corrections during its approach to the sun, did not align with expected gravitational behavior or standard outgassing effects. Comets experience small, non-gravitational forces as heated gases vent and create slight thrust. That's predictable and well modeled, but Atlas's adjustments were too precise, too consistent, occurring at intervals that suggested maintenance. as if its orbital parameters were being actively managed rather than passively influenced. Dr. Hammond carefully documented her findings and escalated them on January 13th. Within 48 hours, 3 independent teams confirmed her results. The deviations were small enough to have been dismissed in 2020 as measurement error, but they were real, measurable, and unexplained by conventional comet physics. Then someone cross-referenced the trajectory anomalies with Hubble's archived imagery. That's when the situation escalated, and why, at 2:43 a.m. on January 17th, the White House was suddenly paying attention. And what they saw in those images is where this story truly begins. What analysts saw in those archived Hubble images forced a conversation no one wanted to have. When researchers overlaid the anomalous trajectory corrections with enhanced surface imaging, patterns began to emerge. Atlas did not simply appear irregular, as comets typically do. Its nucleus displayed geometric features, linear edges, repeating surface segments, and formations that looked disturbingly structured, not definitive proof of engineering, but irregular enough to challenge the assumption of natural origin. Inside NASA's Planetary Defense Coordination Office, the combined data-controlled orbital shifts and geometric morphology triggered immediate concern. On January 16th, a summary report was compiled. On January 17th, that report reached the White House. What followed was the emergency briefing that set Washington on edge. According to a partial summary obtained from sources familiar with the session, 3 findings were presented. First, Atlas exhibited trajectory corrections inconsistent with natural outgassing behavior. Second, its surface geometry showed patterns atypical of cometary structure. Third, and most alarming, Atlas approached Earth during a period when global planetary defense capabilities were significantly impaired by pandemic disruptions. That third point reshaped the conversation. In early 2020, coordination between agencies was limited, observatories were understaffed, international data sharing slowed, response protocols were not optimized. If something had wanted to enter the inner solar system quietly, that was the moment to do it. Dr. Richard Saunders, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense and now a consultant on space security, was briefed on January 19th. When I spoke with him days later, he was measured but direct. The concern, he said, is not just what we found. It's what we weren't equipped to detect because we weren't looking. If there was intelligence behind that object's approach, we had no established framework to identify or respond. We were unprepared. He emphasized that preparedness is built around known threats, asteroids, debris, natural hazards. Atlas did not fit neatly into those models. Its behavior sat just inside the margin of dismissal, subtle enough to avoid alarm in 2020, clear enough to trigger it in 2025. The scenario now discussed in policy circles is unsettling. If Atlas was deliberate, if it represented reconnaissance rather than random cosmic debris, then humanity may have unknowingly failed a test. A small object, natural in appearance, making micro-adjustments subtle enough to blend into expected comet physics, arriving during a period of global distraction, then disintegrating before detailed study could occur. That possibility is what drove congressional briefings. On January 20th, Congressman Jake Morrison, chair of the House Subcommittee on Space and Aeronautics, received classified updates. 2 days later, he issued a public statement noting gaps in planetary defense capabilities and stressing that the nation must not be caught off guard by objects entering our solar system, whether natural or otherwise. Whether natural or otherwise. In Washington, language is precise. That phrase was deliberate. Representative Sarah Chen, ranking member of the same subcommittee, was more candid in a private conversation later confirmed by multiple sources. NASA, she was told, identified characteristics inconsistent with natural cometary behavior. The implication was not declared publicly, but inside those rooms, it was discussed. Now, it's important to remain grounded. There is no definitive proof Atlas was artificial. What exists is a collection of anomalies. Trajectory corrections too precise, structural features too ordered, and timing too coincidental. Anomalies demand investigation, they do not equal confirmation. But what is undeniable is the scale of the response. Emergency briefings, budget reallocations, interagency coordination. Those actions are not triggered by routine cometary irregularities. They are triggered when officials believe something significant may have been overlooked. And what happened next reveals just how seriously Washington is taking this. Because on January 23rd, NASA quietly announced the creation of a new interstellar object characterization task force, a move that signals this is no longer just about Atlas. The press release announcing the new Interstellar Object Characterization Task Force received almost no mainstream coverage. It was framed as a proactive scientific initiative, a program designed to improve rapid analysis of objects entering the solar system from interstellar space. On paper, it sounded routine. In reality, it marked a strategic shift. The task force is led by Dr. Ellen Rodriguez, whose background bridges planetary science and intelligence analysis. That combination is telling. This is not simply a scientific body studying distant comets. It is structured to evaluate potential intent. When agencies blend scientific expertise with security assessment, it signals that uncertainty has crossed into strategic concern. Behind closed doors, policy discussions accelerated. Budget drafts circulated in late January show the Planetary Defense Coordination Office requesting a 300% funding increase for fiscal year 2026. Space-based observation platforms previously scheduled for long-term development are being fast-tracked. Launch timelines are compressed. International coordination agreements are under negotiation to establish a global monitoring network specifically targeting interstellar arrivals. Buried within a Department of Defense planning document was a phrase that drew particular attention: kinetic interdiction capabilities for anomalous close approach scenarios. In plain terms, that means developing the ability to destroy or deflect incoming objects if deemed necessary. Weapons, in other words. All of this in response to a comet that fragmented 5 years ago. Colleagues in academia have confirmed unusual acceleration of telescope imaging projects. Adaptive optics programs, once projected for completion within a decade, are now compressed into 3-year development cycles, funded through classified defense allocations. The directive is clear: identify small, distant objects earlier and characterize them with far greater precision. This shift is happening quietly. There have been no prime-time announcements, no national addresses. Instead, incremental funding approvals, new research mandates, and revised defense planning language. On January 25th, a former student of mine now working within the intelligence community contacted me unexpectedly. Our conversation was brief and careful. "You're asking the right questions," he said. "Keep looking at the timing. Ask yourself, if you wanted to test Earth's detection and response systems without revealing your presence, how would you do it?" Then he ended the call. That question reframes everything. A reconnaissance probe would not announce itself. It would resemble natural debris. Its course corrections would fall within expected physical margins. It would arrive when attention was diverted and coordination weakened. It would gather data. Then it would self-destruct or disintegrate before interception. Atlas fits that pattern uncomfortably well. Again, this is not proof. It is a scenario analysis one that policymakers must consider when anomalies align in unsettling ways. The deeper issue troubling Washington is vulnerability. If Atlas was artificial, it means Earth's monitoring systems can be observed, measured, and potentially exploited. It means our detection thresholds can be mapped. It means we were evaluated without realizing it. And perhaps most concerning, it means we did not even recognize the possibility at the time. Over the coming months, you will likely see increased public emphasis on asteroid defense, expanded telescope arrays, and international cooperation agreements framed around natural hazards. The official narrative will focus on protecting Earth from asteroids, but the underlying catalyst is Atlas, a fragmented comet that forced policymakers to confront a difficult question: are we prepared for something that does not behave like nature? That question is driving funding, reshaping protocols, and redefining how interstellar objects are classified not just as scientific curiosities, but as potential strategic variables. And the next phase of this response moves beyond observation. The next phase of the response moves beyond observation and into operational readiness. What began as a scientific reassessment of archived comet data has evolved into a broader restructuring of planetary defense policy, and the urgency behind it tells us something important. Officials are no longer treating anomalous interstellar objects as rare curiosities. They are treating them as variables in a security equation. Internal planning documents circulated in late January outline 3 parallel tracks. First, accelerated detection. Second, rapid characterization. Third, response capability. The logic is simple. If Atlas represented a missed opportunity for identification, the next object must not. Accelerated detection means more eyes on the sky, both ground-based and space-based. Existing telescope arrays are being upgraded with higher resolution, adaptive optics. AI-assisted anomaly detection software is being integrated into observational pipelines to flag subtle deviations in trajectory behavior. Instead of reviewing data after the fact, systems will now analyze orbital shifts in near real time. Rapid characterization means that once an object is detected, imaging and spectral analysis must happen immediately. In 2020, pandemic disruptions slowed collaboration. That delay will not be tolerated again. Under the new protocols, interstellar objects will trigger automatic multi-agency coordination. Observatories worldwide will be looped in within hours, not weeks. The third track is the most significant: response capability. Kinetic interdiction planning, previously reserved for large asteroid impact scenarios, is now being adapted for smaller, anomalous objects. Defense officials are studying whether current missile defense platforms could be modified for high-velocity space interception. This is no longer purely theoretical discussion. It is contingency planning. When I asked a defense analyst why such aggressive measures are being considered for relatively small objects, he responded carefully, "We don't know what we don't know. The cost of underreacting could be higher than the cost of preparation." That sentence reflects the mindset currently guiding policy. The driving concern is not simply impact risk, it is intent. Natural objects have predictable behaviors, artificial ones may not. If Atlas was artificial, and again, that remains unproven, then it demonstrated controlled navigation and structural consistency. That suggests design, and design implies purpose. The uncomfortable realization is that if something did conduct reconnaissance in 2020, we have no record of what it observed or transmitted. Our satellite networks, defense installations, communication infrastructures, all potentially visible from a close solar approach. During a moment of global crisis, this possibility is what continues to fuel quiet urgency inside Washington. And yet, publicly, the tone remains restrained. Officials speak of improved preparedness and natural hazard mitigation. They emphasize asteroid tracking. They do not speculate on intelligence probes. But internally, the calculus has changed. Interstellar objects are now treated as dual-category phenomena, scientific and strategic. This shift is subtle but historic. For decades, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence focused on radio signals and distant exoplanets. Now, the conversation includes physical objects entering our solar system. And that transition from passive listening to active defense marks a profound change in posture. Because if Atlas was more than a comet, then the next object may not fragment conveniently before close inspection. And that possibility brings us to the broader implications of what Washington is preparing for. The broader implication is not that an alien craft visited Earth. It is that our detection frameworks were built on assumptions, and those assumptions may be incomplete. Planetary defense systems were designed primarily for natural threats, asteroids on collision courses, comets with predictable physics. The algorithms assume gravity, solar radiation pressure, and outgassing. They do not assume intent. If intent enters the equation, the entire analytical model changes. Imagine recalibrating global surveillance systems, not just to detect objects, but to interpret behavior. That is what the new task force is beginning to address. Behavioral modeling for non-natural trajectory evolution is now being incorporated into simulations. Researchers are testing what controlled micro-adjustments would look like within observational noise margins. In other words, they are asking, how would an artificial object disguise itself as a natural one? This is not science fiction. It is scenario planning. Funding increases reflect that shift. The requested 300% budget expansion for the Planetary Defense Coordination Office is not symbolic. It supports new infrared space telescopes capable of earlier detection of dim objects. It supports machine learning platforms trained specifically to identify periodic correction signatures. It supports classified analytic teams tasked with assessing intent probability. Internationally, discussions are underway to establish shared anomaly reporting standards. If one observatory detects unexplained adjustments, all partner nations will be notified immediately. The goal is global transparency within governments, even if public transparency remains limited. Critics argue this may be overreach. After all, no confirmed artificial object has been identified. Atlas remains an anomaly cluster, not a smoking gun. That is true. But strategic planning is rarely reactive to certainty. It responds to risk probability, and officials clearly view the risk as credible enough to justify action. I asked a senior aerospace engineer whether he personally believed Atlas was artificial. He paused before answering. Belief isn't the point, he said. Capability is. We need to ensure that if something deliberate enters our system, we recognize it in time. That distinction matters. Whether Atlas was natural with unusual properties or something designed to test detection systems, it exposed a blind spot. It revealed that during global crises, scientific vigilance can weaken. It showed how small deviations can hide within measurement tolerances. And, perhaps most importantly, it demonstrated that we lack established protocols for assessing non-natural intent in space. That gap is now being addressed. But addressing it quietly raises another issue. Public awareness. Major structural changes in planetary defense policy are unfolding with minimal public debate. Budget reallocations, defense planning adjustments, international agreements, all rooted in reanalysis of a 2020 event most citizens barely remember. Transparency advocates argue that such shifts deserve open discussion. Others insist that premature speculation could cause unnecessary panic. Both perspectives have merit. What remains undeniable is this. Atlas forced Washington to confront vulnerability, and once vulnerability is acknowledged, strategic systems evolve quickly. Which brings us to the final and most important question, not about Atlas, but about what happens next. What happens next depends on how seriously we interpret the lesson of Atlas. If Atlas was entirely natural, then this episode represents a valuable stress test, a reminder to strengthen planetary defense systems and improve data analysis. In that scenario, the increased funding, faster telescopes, and new coordination protocols are prudent upgrades. A harmless anomaly that spurred necessary modernization. But if Atlas was not entirely natural, if it represented reconnaissance or a systems test, then we are entering a new strategic era. In that era, interstellar space is no longer purely scientific territory. It becomes part of the broader security landscape. Consider the implications. A civilization capable of sending small, controlled objects across interstellar distances would likely operate on timelines far longer than human political cycles. Patience would not be an obstacle. Subtlety would be expected. Testing defenses quietly would be logical. And Earth, distracted in 2020, would have presented an ideal observational opportunity. Again, this remains hypothetical. There is no confirmed extraterrestrial probe, no recovered artifact, no definitive evidence. What we have are aligned anomalies, trajectory maintenance patterns inconsistent with passive outgassing, geometric surface features raising structural questions, and arrival timing coinciding with maximum global distraction. Individually, each factor can be rationalized. Together, they compel analysis. The quiet mobilization now underway reflects that compulsion. Advanced telescopes are being prioritized, detection algorithms rewritten, defense contingency models expanded, international monitoring networks strengthened. Publicly, this will be framed as asteroid preparedness. Privately, it includes readiness for something less predictable. Whether Washington is overreacting or appropriately cautious is open to debate. Strategic institutions are designed to anticipate worst-case scenarios. Sometimes that leads to unnecessary escalation. Other times, it prevents catastrophe. The true test will come with the next interstellar arrival. When another object enters the solar system, as statistically will happen, detection systems will be sharper, characterization faster, decision-making frameworks clearer. The question is whether we will interpret anomalies differently next time. Atlas may ultimately be remembered as an unusual comet that forced overdue upgrades, or it may be remembered as the first quiet encounter we failed to fully understand. Either way, it has already reshaped policy. So now I want to hear from you. Knowing what officials now know, the trajectory corrections, the structural anomalies, the timing, do you believe Atlas was entirely natural? Do you see coincidence or calculated entry? Your perspective matters because preparedness is not just a government responsibility, it is a societal one. If you believe transparency on planetary security issues is essential, subscribe to AstroMind right now. Turn on notifications so you don't miss future updates as more information surfaces. Share this analysis with others who care about how humanity prepares for the unknown. Stay informed, stay analytical, and never assume the complete story is always told up front. Because whether Atlas was a harmless fragmenting comet or something far more deliberate, one fact remains: Washington is building defenses for scenarios most people don't yet realize are being considered. And that alone should make all of us look up and ask why.